Welcome back to Mr. Obsolete's Vintage Homesteading. Today we're going to be talking about how I became an accidentally axe collector and collected axes and hatchets. Back about 1980 I moved into a place where I had a wood stove and trees on the property and stuff, and I would heat in the evenings and weekends with it. And so I went down to the hardware store and bought an axe and a splitting maul, just like anybody else would do. And the splitting maul I still have, but and that got me by for a while. The axe I got was a typical piece of crapola that they sell. And one day a buddy of mine, Goose, came by and saw me out working with this crappy old axe, and he said, "Oh, you don't want that piece of junk here." And he went out to his truck and brought me an axe. So this is one of them he gave me. This one's a plum double bit, weighs about 5 pounds. And the axe I'd had before was a single bit. I said, "Well, isn't a single bit what you want to use?" And he said, "No." He said, "Once you use a double bit, you'll never want to use the other, hardly ever." And he was absolutely 100% right. So anyway, how I accidentally became an axe collector was at the shop where I used to work. I always had old engines or outboard motors, something hanging around there, the antique stuff, people to look at. And these three characters who used to come in. And there was a guy and his two buddies, and all three of them were named Mike, of all the weird things. And so the guy that I called Weird Mike because he was such a weird flake, what he did for a living is he'd go to auctions and stuff after everybody bought all the good stuff, and he'd clean the places out. Well, at that time, this had been a long time ago, there were a lot of old axe heads and a few old tools and other things, and so he'd show up with them and stuff, and he'd have like 3 or 4 of them. I'd buy like $3 or $4 a piece, and I just put them in buckets for a long time. And he and his buddies would all show up with different stuff over the period of time. But anyway, I didn't really do much with them, but I was so thrilled with the performance of that old double bit plum that I had, and my buddy Goose gave me a really nice Collins too, which is really basic, my most used axe. But over time I thought, instead of just having these all around and stuff, I should probably dig them out and start putting them together, which I did. And but like I say, at that time, axe collecting was something that hardly anybody did and stuff, and so I ended up with a bunch of axes, mostly just heads, and just sitting around, and started figuring out how to clean them up and fix them. So we'll talk a little bit about how I restore them to begin with. Here's some of the ones that I got. And this one, it's got some good pits in it. It's got the remnants of the handle in it and stuff. It looks pretty crappy, but it's made out of really good steel, so it'll make a nice restoration project. This poor old one here has got a lot of pitting and stuff, and if you look at this edge, probably broke off at one time and they filed it out and stuff like that, but still can be fixed and used. Here's another real rough one. You can see it's got a lot of pits and stuff like that, but it's been filed back tremendous amount too. Really good steel, so it can be made into a good usable axe again. This is a lot better shape, and this is one that I had collected a long time ago and never put together and stuff, but it's a Collins. And there again, that's some really top end steel. This one will clean up really well and make a nice usable axe. So, what I use to clean these heads up, I use my vintage Sears wire wheel with a really coarse wheel on it. And put the head in a vise and grind it off and get all the heavy stuff off of that. And then I take a container like this, and and I'll fill it with just pure old vinegar. Now, vinegar comes in different acid levels, and this is only 5%. You can get it up to 15%, and the 15% works a lot better. But that's what an axe head looks like when it comes out. After about a week of soaking, and in between I'll take and sand it a little bit. It leaves kind of a weird dark patina on it, but that'll come right off if you're using another wire wheel or something on it. And one thing you can see on this too, you see the different colors of the metal here. So this is hardened tool steel, and this is softer, and so the pole is made for hammering on. It won't chip. And this is for holding a really sharp edge. This one is a Dunlap, which is a Sears brand X line at one point. They started out with axes that were called Fulton. Well, the Sears axe they had originally was called a Fulton. It was made by the Fulton Tool Company. This is a real early one here. There's different things on them. Some say that the Fulton Company was bought by Sears to provide tools and axes. Others say they just bought from them, but I can't really find out for sure. But in 1928 they phased the name out as their top line and went to the Craftsman name. And the Fulton tools and axes became the secondary line. Then eventually went to the Dunlap name, was kind of the poor man's axe, but they're still pretty good. This little axe head here is a Sears. Really nice steel. You probably can't see it on it, but it's made in 1936. The little logo right here is Golden Jubilee, 1886 to 1936, and it says Craftsman right up here. So, but that's a really neat little piece. This is a Collins hatchet. This would have been a hatchet obviously too, but this is a Boy Scout one. It really holds an edge, and I've used it in a couple of videos. And this one was used during Depression. It says WPA on it, which is a Works Progress Administration, and they would take usually unskilled workers and put them out working building roads and doing all kinds of stuff, and kind of save the nation from collapsing. So it's kind of an interesting piece. You can see it's been filed back tremendously. It's got a ton of use on it, but still plenty usable. Okay, we'll be back here in a sec. Okay, well, we're going to talk about the two things that I do with axes. Number one is I use them a lot, and secondary, I just collect them just for the heck of it. And this is a heck of it one here. This one says MWH Company, handmade. That's Marshall Wells Hardware Company. That was a huge outfit at one time, and they had the blades made out of different companies, some in Canada like Will and Vale, and this is probably a Collins here, but they only used this logo up until 1915, so this is a really early axe. There again you can see the difference in the material here. So this one, I take this to the shows and display it and talk about it. And then this, there was a group that started in the 1880s that was helping woodworkers got hurt out in the field and stuff. It kept them from losing everything they had and stuff. And this was a parade axe. That's the MWA. Anyway, they had this is just for show. It's aluminum, but they used to have big parades. They had hundreds of guys, and they did all these drills and stuff. And after World War II, it just kind of fizzed away. But you can look up the information on this on Wikipedia. They got some really good BS on it. So just another nice, interesting collector piece. So now we'll talk about axes that I use. This one is my little Evansville. I've had this in a lot of my videos. A really top-notch steel. 1936 was the last year they made them. And because the trees that I have are fairly small, I use this for branching and cleanup work. And this is my absolute #1 axe. I use this more than anything else. But I was lucky. Found me a full-size single bit here a while back. So I'll be doing a test on that here pretty soon. I'm going to thin the handle and do some work on it yet. But it came out really nice. It's a really nice piece. One of the odd things I found with axes is the steel in them. You know, the better the steel, the better they cut. And it seems, you know, the type of wood we have in the Northwest here, Pacific Northwest, really makes a difference. And I don't know if it's the grain structure or whatever. I can have two axes of the same weight and sharpened the same way, and premium steel cuts right through it and the other one gets stuck. So this is probably the best axe of any of them I have. It's a Grand Force Brooks export axe from the 1920s, and this has the best steel and holds the edge better than anything else. The others that I use, this is a Collins. This is the one my buddy Goose gave me years ago, and for a long time that was my #1 axe. It's fairly light, but it sure cuts great. And Collins make a lot of different stuff. Here's a nice Collins single bit. We use that a fair amount too. Here's a Collins brush axe. You go back and watch some of our older videos and see this in use. Boy, if you got stuff up to about 3 inches or so, this will take them down faster than anything, and it's really easy to use. You get all that weight out here and you get a big swing on it. It's just like a hot knife through butter. This is probably a Collins too. This is a Montgomery Ward's special. It's got the bevels in it, what they call the phantom wedge here. This is another excellent axe. It really cuts great. It's a big heavy axe. I use it quite a bit yet too. Been in a couple of our videos. And we got a little plumb double bit here. This is really nice for branching and stuff too. I actually prefer the single bit for that. But anyway, that's why we collect and use axes. And a lot of people have asked, how do you find information out about them? Well, unfortunately, there's not a whole lot out there, and the reason for that is a lot of the manufacturers went out of business during the Depression, and most of them were local builders, and they didn't keep records. So there's a few books out there. This one has a lot of info on caveman axes and stuff, stone axes and stuff like that. It doesn't really go into the modern area too much. It just talks about pictures and a few things on them and stuff. This is another book. It's more informative and has stuff, you know, from the 20s, 30s, and 40s and stuff, and talks about the way to sharpen them and just a lot of good information. This one is really good. The guy who put this together did a lot of research and stuff, and he's got a lot of info of different axe manufacturers and stuff, and does histories on them when he could find it and stuff. And this is a book I use all the time for reference work. And there's a couple of forums and stuff. Axe Junkies is another one that, if you have a question about a certain axe or something, that's a good place. That the guys in there are experts. They know a lot about this stuff. And this book here is basically a tool catalog. It's a repro, but there's a Wiley character that has a YouTube channel. It's Journey North, and the guy's name is Jeremy. He's really sharp on tools. He's got the original full catalogs on this, and he's a real, thoroughly into tools and history. And so what he does is he's got a lot of these catalogs and stuff, and in the very front of this, get an appearance. It shows you the axes and how much they cost per dozen and stuff like that. But the nice thing that it shows that others don't, it shows you the profile of the axe and then what type of axe it was and stuff. And I learned more out of this than all of my other books combined, because I was able to figure out what type of axes I had a lot better and stuff. And so anyway, I'd recommend watching his channel if you're into old tools and stuff. He's an interesting character. So anyway, I'll talk about this one last axe here. This is a stiletto. And when I got it, I thought, man, this is a really neat axe. It's got this really nice profile here. It's real wide right down here and narrow through here. It's a splitting axe, and it doesn't split for squat. I've tried sharpening it and different things and stuff, but the steel in it's not that good, and sounds like lead. But anyway, I really like it. It just, it's just a really nice looking axe. It's got a nice feel to it and stuff like that. And so this is something that I put out at the shows and people talk about, but disappointing in its performance. So anyway, I just wanted to talk briefly about one other guy that used to bring me axes. This guy was Mr. Clay. He was a Cherokee Indian. And one day just wandered in the shop, and I was at the counter working during lunch hour and stuff, and he looked kind of rough around the edges and stuff. He was kind of overweight, and he smiled. He had about 3 teeth missing in the front and stuff, but as soon as he started talking to me, I knew that I would get along with him really well. It's just sometimes you can just tell people. So don't ever judge a book by its cover, and he was a perfect example. But what he did, he would go around to different sales all over the Pacific Northwest, buy and trade and sell stuff. But when he'd come into the shop and knew that you were a junk collector and stuff, he'd ask you what you wanted, and so I would tell him and stuff. And then on his trip a few months later, he'd show up and bring in some axe heads or whatever and stuff. And this guy is one of those guys who turned his life around. When he was young, he was always in trouble. Spent a lot of time in jail and eventually prison. And one day he just decided to tell me his life story and stuff. It was pretty interesting. But anyway, when he was in prison, he never did anything really bad, just stupid. And so anyway, he was talking about his life and stuff, and how that when he was in prison there, he got religion. Turned his life completely around and stuff, and became a preacher, a certified preacher and stuff. And married a really nice gal and had a nice family and stuff like that. But just a really interesting character. So anyway, never prejudge people, because they can be to your benefit and theirs by the things that they do. So anyway, okay, well, we're going to talk about repurposing here. I've gone to a great big sale a number of years back, and the guy was leaving the area and selling everything that he had. He had this nice cabinet here, and he wanted 25 bucks for it, and I didn't have any real use for it, but I just liked it, so I bought it anyway. And I was thinking, well, what can I use it for? So originally I thought about putting some shelves in it. Put in some of my little miniature steam engines in there, make a nice display cabinet out of it. So here's another one. That would have looked really nice in there and stuff, but about a week later I went out to the garage to get an axe, and right inside the door I just had them all stacked in there, and I tripped over and they all went flying, and I went flying, and I thought, well, I got to do something and get these axes out of the way. So I thought, I wonder if that cabinet would work. So guess what? It does. This makes it really easy. I can just go in, and I've got them all numbered on the top, and I can look and see what one's what. And the other thing I had originally thought about doing too was putting our oil cans in here, our vintage oil cans, because we use these all the time because all the equipment we have requires oiling and greasing. And so, but I thought, well, that's just a good way to get the axes out of the way, and if I need one particular axe, I can just go out and pick it right out. So there you go. One man's junk is somebody else's better junk. So we'll see you on the next video. Remember, vintage is the best.